Deeply rooted in the land, the Burden family history is one of struggling to keep the property together. Ensuring its preservation led the Burden children to take steps to honor their parents' labors and traditions.
There were 3 children, 2 never married, Steele and Ione, and Pike married but didn't have any heirs. So the dilemma was in the 1960s, they were all in their 60s or verging on 70, so what do we do with this property? It was Steele Burden that had this idea, why don't we just leave it as a green space? Why don't we do something to protect it? Why don't we do it in honor of our parents who really strive to keep this property together? And so they all agreed to that.
They created the Burden Foundation. They donated the property to the Burden Foundation. Then the Burden Foundation attached a series of covenants to the property.
Steele Burden wanted to keep it rural looking. He felt the open space was the heart of the place. The covenants stated that it may not be developed commercially, that it will be focused on horticultural matters, and that the wooded areas will be preserved forever.
After these covenants were attached to the deeds, the property was given to LSU in an act of donation. And there's also a provision that says if LSU ever violates the covenants, that the property will flip back to the Burden Foundation. It is a wonderful mechanism to ensure that the Burden's vision for the property is maintained.
In October of 1966, Ione Burden and Pike's widow, Jeannette, signed documents beginning the donation of family lands to LSU. Steele avoided formal events. At the time, it was the largest gift ever received by the university. By 1992, the final parcel had been given.
I think the Burden family saw the place as being maintained as a cohesive whole and a way that people would be able to see what life was like before. It was a way to look back and see not only the physical arrangements of farm life, rural life in the 19th century, but also a way to experience the quiet, the peace, the ambiance of that rural setting.
Steele's vision for the property continued to expand. When he noticed a collection of 19th century folk objects and farm tools stored in the university's football stadium, he offered to move the artifacts to his garden studio at Windrush. Eventually, with funding from LSU for a metal building, he combined that collection with his own, and in 1970 began the LSU Rural Life Museum.
Steele's idea was to make it look like Grandpa's barn, Louisiana's attic, so it was kind of organized, but not organized. He did everything wrong from a curator's point of view, but it works because people love going up to the carriages. There's no glass, there's no barriers, and they feel connected.
Added to the displays in the barn are paintings, sketches, and clay objects created by Steele depicting life in rural Louisiana. And like his gardens, this was only the beginning. With his own money and help from his sister Ione, Steele was able to purchase and move to Windrush the former slave cabins from William Plantation in St. James Parish.
Steele, being the artist and the landscape designer, tried to lay out the buildings, recreating some type of historic landscape around them. So the buildings from William were actually moved and placed back in the same configuration as he had found them at William. Historically, not on the original property, but they're in reference to each other as they would have been 160 years ago. He realized very early in the 1940s and 50s that when people came to Louisiana, they came to New Orleans and they came to the River Road. And when they went to the River Road, all they saw was the big houses. And he thought the most interesting part of a plantation was behind the big house.
Soon there were more buildings and objects representing the lives of the working classes, both free and slaves, in rural Louisiana during the 18th and 19th centuries.
It's the largest collection of vernacular architecture from the state of Louisiana, and also the largest collection of material culture artifacts from farms, houses, plantations, and people's actual items that they gave us. They have a provenance. They're not just things, they're things with a story and a history.